There was no incidents involved, no altercations or none of that, and we like 150 deep out here. We so deep out here, like it's crazy.
Pooh Shiesty just reignited the deadly Memphis war with EBG. A conflict that many people thought had gone quiet is suddenly being discussed again, bringing old accusations, diss tracks, shootings, deaths, and one of the most controversial stories involving EBG Mooslime back into the spotlight. What started as a local rivalry left a trail that Memphis has not forgotten, and the people caught inside it paid prices that go far beyond anything a diss track could capture. The music that came out of this era did not just document the conflict, it became part of it. Every lyric was a message, every song was a move, and buried inside all of it is a story involving a robbery, a series of diss tracks that kept escalating, and one shooting that people are still debating to this day. Stay locked in because this story is bigger than it looks.
Man, you groupie ass, fan out ass, you groupie ass niggas. Quit. Get my DM, bro. Something about these motherfuckers, these niggas. It's two sides to every story. Just wait till I get down to my side. I'm flushing you. I stomp them.
Yo, what's good, fam? Today we are breaking down the full story behind Pooh Shiesty and EBG, how a robbery sparked one of Memphis rap's most personal beefs, how the music became part of the war, and how one leaked bar just reignited everything. Let's get into it. The origins of the tension between Chopper Gang and EBG did not begin with a diss track. According to the narrative that circulated within Memphis and eventually spread more broadly, one of the earliest flashpoints in the feud involved a robbery. The claim, repeated widely, was that individuals associated with Chopper Gang allegedly entered a location connected to EBG and took firearms. If that sounds like a relatively contained local incident, understand that what followed made it anything but contained. The stolen weapons were allegedly displayed online. That detail changed everything. In street culture, a robbery is already a serious violation, but putting the stolen items on display for the public to see transforms a robbery into a deliberate humiliation. It sends a message. It says, not only did we take from you, but we are showing everyone that we did it and that you could not stop us. Social media made it possible to deliver that message to thousands of people instantly, including people who had nothing to do with the original incident. What might otherwise have remained a local dispute known only to those directly involved became a publicly documented act of disrespect that neither side could walk away from quietly. That is the foundation on which everything else in this story was built. Drop a comment below if you knew about this part of the story before today, because a lot of people who followed this beef never heard how it actually started. Pooh Shiesty's emergence from Memphis changed the scale of what had been a local conflict. Born Lontrell Dental Williams Jr. in South Memphis on November 8, 1999, he built a following before his music began reaching national audiences. His affiliation with Chopper Gang was not hidden. It was central to his identity as an artist. After catching the attention of Gucci Mane, he signed to 1017 Records, and his profile exploded. His early work reflected the Memphis tradition of blending street reality with rap bravado, and as his audience grew, local listeners paid close attention to what he was saying and what he was not saying. In Memphis, knowing the context behind lyrics is part of the culture. When an artist from a specific neighborhood makes music that references a specific type of incident, people who understand the local landscape hear things in that music that casual fans from other cities simply do not catch. That dynamic is central to understanding how the Chopper Gang and EBG conflict escalated from a local street matter into something with a national audience. Pooh Shiesty's rise gave the conflict a platform it never would have had otherwise. In 2020, Pooh Shiesty released Back in Blood as a collaboration with Chicago artist Lil Durk. The song became one of the biggest records of that year, eventually earning platinum certification and introducing Pooh Shiesty to an enormous mainstream audience. For most listeners, it was an energetic trap record about loyalty, street credibility, and retaliation in a generalized sense. But for Memphis listeners paying close attention, a specific lyric carried a different kind of weight. The bar referenced people knowing who took something from them and needing to get it back in blood. Without additional context, that line is standard rap bravado. With the context of the alleged robbery and the stolen weapons that have been publicly displayed, Memphis listeners interpreted it as a direct message aimed at EBG, a taunt, a reminder that the original act of disrespect had not been forgotten and that the score had not been settled. It is important to be clear, interpreting a lyric as a reference to a real-world incident is not the same as proving that the artist personally participated in that incident. Rap music has always operated in a space where exaggeration, artistic performance, coded language, and real-life references exist simultaneously. What matters for this story is not whether the lyric was literally true, but that enough people in Memphis heard it that way to ensure that EBG could not simply ignore it. Let us know in the comments whether you heard Back in Blood differently after learning what Memphis listeners say it was really about. EBG or Jizzle made sure they did not ignore it. Jizzle had his own history with Pooh Shiesty's camp, and that history made the conflict more personal than a simple group versus group beef. His response was immediate and pointed. Rather than recording an original track, Jizzle rapped directly over the Back in Blood instrumental, turning Pooh Shiesty's own hit into a diss aimed at him. Memphis listeners and observers widely viewed that move as disrespectful by design, using the enemy's platform to send a message back. The EBG response also incorporated CGK imagery and messaging, an acronym that communicated directly what EBG thought about Chopper Gang. In that same response track, Jizzle taunted that despite shots going back and forth, no one had died yet, a line that many interpreted as a direct escalation. He then confirmed in an interview with Street Juice TV alongside Mooslime that Back in Blood was indeed a direct diss aimed at EBG, taking any remaining ambiguity off the table. Once both sides were publicly on record, every new song became a potential escalation. Every lyric was examined, every reference was decoded, and the audience watching the feud grew larger with each exchange. The song Rumors was Jizzle's next move. He used the record to continue challenging the image that Pooh Shiesty and Chopper Gang had been building through their music, pushing back against the narrative that Chopper Gang had come out ahead. The argument embedded in the song was that the dominance being projected was exaggerated or outright false. But what made Rumors particularly significant was a specific inclusion that went beyond the Pooh Shiesty beef entirely. Jizzle had Quando Rondo appear on the record via FaceTime. For anyone who understood the broader landscape of rap at that time, that was not a random feature. Quando Rondo's crew was connected to the death of King Von, one of Lil Durk's closest associates, who had been killed in November 2020. Including Rondo in a diss aimed at Pooh Shiesty, who had collaborated with Durk on Back in Blood, was a calculated move designed to pour gasoline on multiple fires at once. The EBG Back in Blood remix was subsequently removed due to copyright infringement, but the removal only amplified attention. Every time a record got flagged or taken down, commentary about why circulated and pulled new listeners into the story. If you were following Memphis rap during this era, drop a comment and tell us what you remember about when Rumors dropped, because the reaction to that Quando Rondo appearance was something else. The back and forth demonstrated something important. In this era, musical beef is not just about music. It is a public performance of credibility, and every song is an argument about whose version of events deserves to be believed. Pooh Shiesty's catalog from this period continued to contain references to rivals, retaliation, and the blurred identity that became closely associated with his public persona. Blurred was not just a word, it was a rallying signal for a specific community of listeners who understood his references and interpreted his lyrics within a framework that went far beyond what most mainstream listeners could access. But the line between artistic performance and real-world events became increasingly blurry as the conflict intensified and as the people involved began suffering real consequences. The story involving EBG Mooslime, also known as Moo Moo, became one of the most discussed and contested elements of the entire feud. Mooslime was a prominent figure associated with EBG who had publicly confirmed alongside Jizzle that the beef with Pooh Shiesty was real. According to what circulated within Memphis and eventually spread more broadly, a violent encounter allegedly occurred between Pooh Shiesty and Mooslime that left Mooslime wounded. The details of what allegedly happened, including who was present, where it occurred, and exactly how it unfolded, have never been fully established through independent reporting. What became public was an unreleased Pooh Shiesty track called Last Seen Evil, which leaked in early 2026 and contained a bar that stopped Memphis cold. In the song, Pooh Shiesty raps about standing over Moo Moo with that blurred and expressing that somehow Mooslime survived. That lyric, delivered casually in the middle of a verse, was interpreted widely as Pooh Shiesty claiming he had stood over wounded Mooslime, pulled the trigger, and was surprised the man was still alive. Whether that lyric reflects a real event, an exaggerated claim, or artistic bravado is a question the available evidence does not fully answer. But the fact that it appeared in a song recorded after Pooh Shiesty's release from federal prison in late 2025 meant the conflict had not died during his incarceration. It had simply been waiting. The jammed gun allegation added another layer to the story. According to street commentary and retellings that spread widely, after Mooslime had already been wounded, Pooh Shiesty allegedly attempted to shoot him again, but the weapon malfunctioned. The claim was that the gun jamming gave Mooslime the opportunity to escape alive. That detail became one of the most repeated elements of the entire feud narrative. It is essential to treat it with appropriate caution. The jammed gun story is part of the street mythology surrounding the feud. It has not been independently verified through court records, police reports, or credible journalism. It circulated primarily through the same channels where every other piece of this story was debated and amplified. Presenting it as established fact would be doing the audience a disservice. What can be said is that the claim became a central part of how many people understood the Mooslime incident, and its spread contributed significantly to the mythology that built up around Pooh Shiesty's reputation within the conflict. What do you think actually happened that day? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because the debate around this specific incident has been going on for years, and there are still people on both sides of the argument. EBG's side pushed back against how Pooh Shiesty's camp framed everything. Supporters of Mooslime and EBG argued that the lyrics and claims coming from Chopper Gang overstated what had actually happened. The accusation of cap rapping, meaning claiming credit for acts that did not occur or exaggerating the circumstances of real events, was a significant part of how EBG publicly challenged Pooh Shiesty's credibility. Mooslime himself later signaled that there were two sides to the story, and that he intended to give his own account. That framing acknowledged that a confrontation of some kind had occurred, while simultaneously rejecting the version being promoted through Pooh Shiesty's music. The competing narratives are a major reason why the story has remained controversial rather than simply becoming accepted fact. When both sides claim their version is true and neither can be fully corroborated through independent evidence, the audience is left with a genuinely unresolved dispute. EBG Jizzle's Paralyzed added another chapter to the conflict, and the circumstances surrounding it were significant. According to publicly reported information, Jizzle was shot 3 times in the arm. Rumors spread quickly claiming the injuries were far more severe, that he had been paralyzed. Jizzle pushed back on that claim directly by releasing a video showing himself moving his limbs freely from his hospital bed. He was not paralyzed, he had been shot in the arm and was wearing a cast. But Pooh Shiesty had already moved on Instagram before the clarification could spread, posting a series of messages that taunted Jizzle publicly. Pooh Shiesty wrote that the op had dissed and now could not even walk. He asked where Jizzle had disappeared to and questioned whether his people would mention it in the next song. The taunting was specific, pointed, and public. Jizzle's response was to return to the streets a few days later and record Paralyzed while still wearing the cast. The song and the visual of him recording while recovering became a statement of their own. It communicated survival, defiance, and continued engagement in the feud from a man who had just been shot and who his enemy had publicly mocked as unable to walk. Then came the moment that made the conflict feel personal in a way that no diss track could manufacture. Pooh Shiesty's brother, known as Tita Pay, died of brain cancer. The grief was real, the loss was public, and Pooh Shiesty mourned openly. What happened next generated significant controversy. Jizzle released Paralyzed during the period immediately surrounding that death, and the timing was not lost on anyone watching. On the record, Jizzle made allegations about Tita Pay that struck directly at the memory of a man who had just died. It must be stated clearly that making claims about who was responsible for Tita Pay's death or the specific nature of EBG's intentions without reliable evidence would be irresponsible. What is documented is that the timing of Paralyzed and the content of its allegations about Pooh Shiesty's deceased brother became one of the most charged and controversial moments in the entire feud. How much of the reaction was EBG's actual position and how much was amplified by an audience eager to escalate is a question that deserves caution rather than assumption. A lot of people felt some kind of way about that move. Drop a comment and tell us where you stood on it. The violence surrounding this feud affected everyone involved in ways that extended far beyond music. Grief, fear, the pressure of public threats, damaged relationships, changed alliances, and the constant presence of law enforcement attention all created an environment in which being associated with this conflict carried serious personal costs. The public nature of the feud meant there was no easy exit. Every post, every song, every comment was potentially evidence of intent, association, or motive. For young artists trying to build careers in an environment where street credibility and musical identity are closely linked, that creates an almost impossible situation. And for people who were not artists but were associated with the groups involved, the danger was even more immediate and even less connected to the potential rewards of music industry success. Pooh Shiesty's federal criminal case fundamentally changed the trajectory of the conflict. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison on firearms conspiracy charges connected to a shooting and robbery at a hotel in Bay Harbor Islands, Miami in October 2020. The case involved allegations that Pooh Shiesty and 2 others shot 2 men during what began as a marijuana and sneaker transaction. He was released early in late 2025 after serving the majority of his sentence. His incarceration removed one of the central voices in the Memphis feud from the active environment for years. But it did not erase the music. It did not erase the beef. And when he came home and dropped his comeback single FDO, First Day Out, it was clear that his time in federal prison had done nothing to soften his edge. Memphis was paying attention again. And then, Last Seen Evil leaked and answered every question anyone still had about where his head was at. Mooslime's legal problems and publicly documented firearm-related allegations also affected the EBG side of the conflict. Law enforcement operations targeting Memphis street groups during this period swept up individuals connected to various local networks, and the consequences imposed on those individuals changed who was available, who was visible, and who was capable of continuing to participate in the ongoing cultural conflict. When key figures on both sides of a feud are dealing with federal charges or incarceration, the nature of the rivalry inevitably transforms. It does not disappear, but it can no longer operate the same way it did when both sides were free, active, and producing music in real time. What happened to the rivalry after both sides experienced major legal consequences does not fit neatly into a simple narrative of resolution or continuation. A street conflict that has produced music, generated violence, created an elaborate web of public allegations, and captured the attention of a national audience does not simply end because its participants are incarcerated or physically separated. The music remains. Old songs get rediscovered. Unreleased tracks surface. Interviews from years earlier get clipped and recirculated. In this way, a conflict can stay alive culturally even when the original environment that produced it has been dramatically altered by time, legal consequences, and changing circumstances. That is exactly what happened here. That is precisely why the idea of Pooh Shiesty reigniting the war makes sense right now. The leak of Last Seen Evil in early 2026, a track recorded after his release from federal prison that contained the Moo Moo bar delivered without hesitation, restarted the entire conversation. This was not an old song resurfacing. This was new music with a direct reference to the most controversial moment in the feud's history, recorded by a man who had just done years in federal prison and was telling Memphis exactly where his head was. The word reignited does not necessarily mean a new physical confrontation has definitively begun. It means that renewed attention has been brought to something that had gone relatively quiet, and that attention pulled everything back with it. The robbery, the diss tracks, the Ajizzle shooting, the death of T.P., the Moo Moo allegations, the jammed gun story, all of it flooding back into the conversation at once. Social media and YouTube play a specific role in how this kind of revival happens. A single lyric can be clipped from a song, posted without context, analyzed in a reaction video, and eventually repeated so many times that it begins to be treated as a confirmed account of historical events rather than as an artistic claim that may or may not correspond to what actually occurred. Repetition creates perceived truth. When thousands of people share the same clip with the same interpretation, that interpretation acquires a kind of authority that has nothing to do with whether it is accurate. The jammed gun story is a perfect example. It has been repeated so many times that many listeners treat it as established fact, but the only sources for that detail are street commentary and the same channels where everything else in this story was debated. That does not make it false, it makes it unverified, and that distinction matters enormously. The Mooslime shooting story deserves to be laid out one final time with full honesty about what is and is not known. The competing narratives include Pooh Shiesty's lyrical account in Last Seen Evil, in which he claims to have stood over Moo with his blur and expressed surprise that the rival survived. The widely circulated claim that a gun malfunction allowed Mooslime to escape a second shot. EBG's denial or alternative interpretation of those events. Mooslime's own stated intention to tell his version and the absence of sufficient independent evidence to fully verify the specific details of any of those accounts. What can be said with confidence is that something happened, that something was serious enough to generate lyrics, generate public responses, generate commentary, and generate a portion of the mythology that continues to define how people talk about this feud. What cannot be said with confidence is that every detail of the viral story corresponds precisely to what actually occurred. Street mythology and factual history are not the same thing, and treating one as the other does a disservice to everyone involved. Understanding why this feud became so personal requires looking beyond the music and the allegations to the social dynamics that drive conflicts of this kind. Reputation is everything in the environment that produced Pooh Shiesty, Chopper Gang, and EBG. A public humiliation such as having weapons stolen and displayed for everyone to see creates pressure to respond that goes beyond simple anger. It becomes about identity, about how you are perceived by your community, about whether the people around you see you as capable of defending yourself and your affiliations. When that pressure exists, every response is being watched. Every diss track is being evaluated. Loyalty becomes both a value and a performance. The audience watching the conflict does not simply observe. It participates in deciding who is credible, who is a coward, and who has the upper hand. And its judgments create additional pressure on everyone involved to keep escalating. If you have been following Memphis rap for a while, you already understand this dynamic better than most. Drop a comment and tell us who you think had the upper hand at each stage of this beef. Back in Blood occupies a unique place in the story, precisely because it became a mainstream hit, while also containing references that Memphis listeners understood as connected to a very specific local conflict. A song about street credibility and loyalty that reaches platinum status is no longer a private message. It is a public declaration heard by millions of people who have no context for the references embedded in it. For those millions, Back in Blood is an energetic rap collaboration. For Memphis listeners familiar with the Chopper Gang and EBG conflict, it was something else entirely. That dual nature is a recurring feature of street rap in the streaming era. Songs can simultaneously be mainstream entertainment and locally coded communication, and mainstream success can unintentionally amplify local conflicts to an audience that has no framework for understanding their real stakes. To bring the full timeline together, it starts with the alleged robbery and the public display of stolen weapons. Back in Blood announced Chopper Gang's position to a national audience. Jizzle responded by rapping over the instrumental and later dropping Rumors featuring Quando Rondo on FaceTime, a calculated shot aimed at both Pooh Shiesty and Lil Durk. Pooh Shiesty mocked the Jizzle publicly on Instagram after a Jizzle was shot 3 times in the arm. Jizzle came back wearing a cast and dropped Paralyzed time to Pooh Shiesty's grief over the death of his brother T.P., including allegations about the deceased on the record. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, an alleged violent confrontation with Mooslime became the most controversial chapter in the conflict. Pooh Shiesty went to federal prison. Mooslime faced his own legal consequences. The active environment quieted. Then Pooh Shiesty came home in late 2025, dropped FDO, and Last Seen Evil leaked in early 2026 with that Moo bar sitting right in the middle of the verse like the beef never left. Because for Pooh Shiesty, it apparently never did. Where the rivalry stands now is a complicated question. Many of the individuals involved have faced incarceration, legal consequences, or dramatically changed circumstances since the conflict's most intense period. But cultural memory does not follow the same timeline as prison sentences. Memphis listeners who lived through this era remember it. Younger listeners are discovering it now through old music, commentary, and documentary-style breakdowns exactly like this one. The cultural rivalry persists because the music persists, because the allegations were never fully resolved, and because both sides produced enough material during the conflict's active years to fuel ongoing debate indefinitely. And now with Pooh Shiesty back and apparently still carrying that same energy, the question of what comes next is not an abstract one. Pooh Shiesty reignited the deadly Memphis war with EBG. because the history between these two worlds was never truly put to rest. It was paused by incarceration and changed by circumstance. It was quieted by time and redirected by legal consequences. But the music is still there. The claims are still there. The mythology surrounding the Mooslime shooting, the jammed gun, the stolen weapons, the diss tracks, and all of the laws connected to this era of Memphis rap is still there for anyone who goes looking. One leaked track was all it took to bring all of it back. One bar about Moo Moo delivered like it was nothing. And suddenly the comments are full, the breakdowns are getting views, and a conflict that many people assumed had quietly faded is being debated again with the same intensity it carried at its peak. That is the nature of what was built here. It was too well documented, too publicly fought, and too deeply embedded in the music to simply disappear. Memphis rap has always walked the line that most other regional scenes have not had to walk in quite the same way. The tradition of making music that reflects real life with unsparing honesty means that when real life includes violence, loss, rivalry, and consequences, those things end up in the music. And when the music reaches a national and global audience, what was originally a local story becomes a shared story. The most important thing to take from everything covered in this breakdown is not the mythology. It is not the jammed gun or the diss tracks or the debates that fill comment sections with speculation. The most important thing is the human reality underneath all of it. Young men who were building their lives, their careers, and their identities in a city with a proud and complicated musical tradition ended up trapped in a public conflict that had real, devastating, and in some cases permanent consequences. The internet can treat that history as entertainment. It can turn old lyrics into viral content and old allegations into debate. But for the people who lived inside that conflict, for their families, for their communities, the consequences were never entertainment. They were real. And any serious engagement with this story has to hold both things at once. The music that will continue to circulate and be discussed, and the human cost that the music can never fully capture. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read everything down there.